We have Nolan Erck today, and he is going to teach us everything about testing. I think it's a subject that doesn't get as much love as perhaps it should in the CF community. And I think the more you learn, the more likely you're going to test. And I think every developer should do testing. Go ahead, Nolan.
All right. Thanks, Jake. Thanks for having me. Go ahead and share my screen. All right, there we go. Can you see my slides okay?
Yeah.
All right, excellent. So this is a presentation I wrote a little while ago called Why Testing is Important and Where Should I Start? If you don't want to take a bunch of notes, just take a photo of this slide here. This is the GitHub repo where everything is at. All my slides, all my code demos, you can just follow along from there. And then you don't have to, take photographs or screenshots or anything if you don't want to. A little bit about me. I run south of Shasta. We are a developer consultancy. I'm based here in Sacramento. We've built web apps and mobile apps for a variety of different clients. I also teach different programming workshops for clients and other training facilities as part of the business. I often help teach the Adobe Cold Fusion certification program that they have at CF Summit, things like that. I run the SAC Interactive Tech Meetup. It's a monthly group here in California. It used to be our CFUG, just like this one. Several years ago, my then co-founder and I rebooted the group into an all things web and mobile group called SAC Interactive. I used to program video games for a living before I stopped doing that, made the jump to the dot-com boom like a lot of other folks, and that's when I got really into the web and have been mostly focused on web things since then. And I usually tell people music is my drug of choice. I spend a lot of my money and time buying records and CDs. My house looks like this as a result of that. I am quite proud of my record collection. All right. So first things first, should I test my web app? Yes, absolutely. No exceptions. Whatever the app is you're building, no matter how big or small it is, you should have some sort of mechanism for testing the code before it goes out into production, ideally, so you can make sure it's doing what it's supposed to do. One of the pieces of advice I got early in my career was this one here. The difference between a senior developer and a junior developer is a senior developer will test their code. Why is testing important? Lets you find and fix your bugs, obviously. The sooner you find your bugs, the easier it is to fix them, so the better, and also the cheaper it is to fix them. A customer finding a bug in production while your app is actively running and maybe processing financial data, that's a bad thing. It could cost you all kinds of bad publicity. You could get bad Yelp reviews if it's that sort of website. You could end up on the bad end of a legal situation. All kinds of negative things can happen. You want to find and fix as many of your bugs as you can before the code ends up in the customer's hands, and the customers are the ones dealing with those bugs. There's actual data backing up how much cheaper it is to find and fix bugs earlier in the software development lifecycle versus later in the process. If you can find your bugs while you're architecting and just initially coding on your website or your mobile app or whatever it is way, way more efficient and cost effective to do it there versus after your app has been released out into the wild. So how or where should I start testing my app? Really just pick somewhere and start. Not to sound crass or anything, but don't worry about should I start with the back end? Should I start with the front end? Should I test the API endpoints first? Pick wherever the easiest spot is that you feel you can start writing some tests for it and start from there. You can always expand later on. Don't worry about installing different testing libraries. You can start with just manual testing, like open your app up in a browser, click on the buttons. Do the buttons work and do what they're supposed to do? That's testing. There are a lot of testing libraries available out there now. We were talking before the recording started a little bit about TestBox. TestBox is fantastic. There's also Playwright and Cypress and all kinds of different things out there. You can get caught up in analysis paralysis. Really don't worry about picking the wrong testing library. There's not really such a thing as picking the wrong testing library. You can use whatever mechanisms you're comfortable using and then just iterate over time and add to it and refine your tests and your testing environment as you need to. You don't even actually have to install any of those to start testing. You could just make little .cfm files in the case of a Cold Fusion app and test your code that way. You can do things like this. Like here I have just I'll make that a little bit bigger. Here I have just a simple CFML function library with a couple of functions in it that do some basic math stuff for me. And here I have a tests.cfm file. I include that math utility library, and I'm just going to output some generic text on the screen so I can tell what's happening, call that function, get back the result, and then test it. Did I get the value that I expected? If I did, cool. And if not, throw a message saying, hey, that's not working. You can absolutely write tests this way and get value out of them. Here's that code running in a browser. I click on the tests. You can see, yay, my different function library stuff works the way I expect it to. I did not, and you'll notice there's no, in this folder here, let me close these ones so it's easier to focus on the right one. In this folder here, there's no test box in there. There's no Mocha or Chai. It's literally just that CFM library and then my test file for it, and that's it. All right, so the pros for doing that is it's really quick. I made one .cfm file and I started testing things. The downsides for it is that's kind of tedious. Um, if I have one, in this case, my test.cfm file, let's say it has 25 tests in it. If test number 4 dies, all of the tests after it in the file will stop running. I also only have primitive HTML output, like we saw here. Just, basic HTML on the screen. It's not exporting to a PDF file or emailing the results to a DevOps engineer or anything, maybe more useful like that. Um, but at least it got us started with what we want to do, and we can build on it from there, like I said. So ideally, what you want to do is take that first step that we looked at and then build on it without adding a lot of overhead to developers. That's one of the complaints developers have is writing tests and running testing engines and whatever takes more time. I don't have time. So you do want to have a way to run all of your tests easily. If one test fails, the rest of your tests still run. It doesn't do you any good if, like I said, test number 4 out of 100 dies, and then your remaining 96 tests or whatever never get run. So you want to have a way to like run all 100 tests. If 3 of them fail, the other 97 still complete. You can see the results of it and go on from there. It's also nice to have some sort of results so you can see a summary of like how many tests worked, how many tests failed, summarize all that info into something useful for maybe your manager or the DevOps team or whatever. Makes it easier to do some, future planning for your application and that sort of thing. That is where TestBox comes into play. So TestBox, if you don't know, is a product made by Ortus Solutions. It is a testing library for testing your CFML apps. TestBox can be used to test any CFML application. I'm going to say that again. TestBox can be used to test any CFML application. You do not have to be running Callbox to test your app using TestBox. TestBox gives you a better overall experience testing your application. You get, you can export your results in different formats. It's got some nice features to it. It's a great overall product for testing your CFML app. The better structured your code base is, the easier it will be to write a full suite of tests for your application. If you're using a bunch of CF includes and table-based HTML, things are not written in some sort of proper software architecture design where you have functions that take inputs and outputs and that sort of thing. You can still use TestBox to do it. You're just going to get a lower quality end result of your testing suite results than you would if you had like a proper, OO framework based application where everything's nicely organized. There are middle grounds between those two ends of the spectrum too, though. Like if you use a bunch of custom tags and you're using custom tags properly, passing arguments in, returning data back out through the caller scope, you'll get a little bit more bang for your buck with TestBox that way. You can test it like so. You can test just regular functions like we saw in that first demo. You can test just one-off CFCs with it. You don't have to be in a full-blown OO framework to test things. TestBox can handle all of those for you however you want. So how do you get TestBox working? First, you have CommandBox on your machine. If you are a CFML developer in 2026, you should have CommandBox on your development machines. Full stop. 100%. I don't care if you're on Adobe or Lucy or Boxlang or whatever. Command box is the equivalent of a JavaScript developer having Node and NPM installed. It just you just have it because that's how development works these days. So once you have command box installed, you type box install testbox, wait a few seconds, and that's it. You will now have the testbox library in a slash testbox folder in your application. And there's this testbox runner.cfm file. That is the easiest way to start using TestBox. There are a few other bells and whistles you can do with some other things inside TestBox. I'm not going to get into all of those details here. Ortus has a bunch of great demos explaining how that stuff works, but I will show you what it looks like after you do the box install TestBox thing here in this folder. So I've got my TestBox folder with all this stuff inside it. You don't have to touch any of that. I lied. You touched one thing in here. You go to your tests, runner.cfm file, and you might need to touch this file if you want to go in and configure some different things about how TestBox works on your machine. But other than this runner file, you probably don't have to touch anything here. So outside of that, I've got this include folder with, again, my math utility, just some simple CFML code in here. I've got a couple of functions that take arguments in and return data back out. And I have another folder called my tests. You can see I have a math test CFC in here. And this is how you write TestBox tests. You write a CFC, you say it extends TestBox system base spec, and that's all you have to do to start using TestBox. Put that in your CFC and you're done. In this case, I'm including that math utilities CF library that I wrote earlier. And then I have this function run thing in here. And inside there you have this, what they call a describe block, and then these it blocks inside it. This is how you write tests, not just in TestBox, but in many of the other modern testing libraries that are out there. I'll expand more on that in a little bit. You can see here, just describe, these are just basically labels that output some text on the screen, formatted in different ways to show you which of your tests or group of tests happens to be running at that point in time. And then I just call the function from inside my, in this case, inside my math utility library, call it, pass in some arguments, get the value back. And then you have these assertions where you say, I expect that thing to be equal to some value. And if this ends up being true, the thing I expect is 201, then your test will pass. If I have, let's say instead of 201, I got, some other value that was not the correct value, 101 plus 100 is not 23,000 or whatever that is, 233,000, the test would fail. And then same thing down here. I have another test. It can multiply numbers. In this case, I'm testing my multiply number function that was up here. That guy. Get the total back and expect it to be something else. And you can run those by simply going to your browser and start at the very top of my folder structure so you can see where I'm at. So here, this is the same. This is my Lucy server that's running, and it's pointing to this demo2 folder, inc my tests and testbox, inc my tests and testbox. So I drill into my test, and I simply click on that test. It'll automatically run and show me like, yay, these are the tests that ran, and one passed and one did not. I can go back in here and see, oh, that's because I had a typo in my test. It should be 201 is what I expect to have happen. So I'll save that. And then I'll reload my test. And now they both pass. Yay. There's your results. So there's TestBox. And this works for, again, this, you'll notice there's no cold box in here anywhere. There's no framework 1 in here anywhere. There's no OO framework, MVC, magic hiding behind the scenes. It's just a generic chunk of CFML code that I was able to test with my TestBox stuff. Go back here. All right. So like I said before about the better structured your the better structured your CF application is, the more value you'll get out of the test suites that you write for it. You'll notice that I had this include here, then I included my code that way. This is kind of an okay situation because all I'm including are functions that have encapsulation around them. The arguments get passed in and out like they're supposed to. But if you have like a generic or more traditional CF include, where just CF include header.cfm, and you've got a whole bunch of code all in one file with no actual arguments being passed in and out and no structure to it. CF includes leak data. They're not very good at being self-documented. Self-documenting, it's unclear when you use CF includes if there's data that is getting passed in or required to be passed in, what the type of data is that needs to be passed in, things of that nature. You can still test them, but you'll find that you get very mixed results with writing tests in that kind of situation. But then again, you're going to get very mixed results by using CF includes for that sort of thing as well. I would recommend not using CF includes for basically anything in that sort of situation. Um, what you want to do instead is here, let's open this third one, close these files down so I don't get confused. And let's look at a different version of this. So this is a similar setup to what we had before. I have my test box thing in here, and I have basically is an example of what not to do with your stuff. So here's add user. If I just had a .cfm file like this, where there's a straight CF query inside there, there's no CF function in here, there's no CF component in here, it's not clear how to test this because this is a query that has to be form posted to, see form.first name, form.last name, in order for this query to work. So I can't actually write a function that calls this query as is and get it to do something. This sort of code would be very difficult to write automated tests for. This sort of code is also not very reusable because I have to have a form that posts to this, and the form has to have these 4 fields spelled this way. If I have multiple spots in my app where I want to do an insert and insert something into the user table, I cannot reuse this query as is to do that. However, if I took that same query and instead wrapped it in a CF function, and passed those arguments in, and then use arguments dot first name, last name, and so on, instead of form dot first name, last name, and so on, then I get a whole lot more value out of the code that I have here. I wrote a couple more extra lines of code. It's not a big deal, and I'm going to explain why shortly. You can see the difference in the two setups here. So if I have that first example where we have the query with the form fields hard-coded into it, you could write a test for it where you include that CFM template like so, and then make fake form variables to go into it. But there's nothing to self-document about that. There's nothing clear about this line of code as is that tells you I need 4 form fields to go into it. Here are the names of those fields. Here are the data types of those fields. This code you could test things in this situation, but it's not a good use of anyone's time or resources to set things up like that. If you go to that other idea, where we wrap our query in a CF function, pass the arguments in, specify the types, use the argument scope instead of the form scope, now we can write a test like this. Include that file just like before, and then just call a function. Pass the 4 arguments in, you get your result back, and then you can test it and say, okay, I expect that thing to be true. That means yes, the add function ran correctly, and it was, the results went back in as they're supposed to. So you get a little bit more bang for your buck. You get more testable code when you write better quality code using standard practices like wrap your code in a function, use data types for things coming in and out of your function and so on. Testing Coldbox apps. Also just as easy as the commands we were looking at earlier. You have command box installed because every developer writing CFML in 2026 should have command box installed. And then just do box, Coldbox, create app. That installs the Coldbox library. It sets up a scaffolding of kind of the skeleton of how you would start to build out a Coldbox app. And it includes TestBox already configured to start running your application. So just like we had a TestBox runner.cfm file that we looked at here, runner, that guy. When you do box, Coldbox, create app, you get the same thing. You get a test runner.cfm file as well. Mhm. You can test both your cold box CFCs on the cold box mechanisms and such that are in there. You can also test one-off CFCs this way. Um, Wirebox also comes as part of that ecosystem if you use Wirebox to do any dependency injection or that sort of thing. I use Wirebox pretty regularly. It's great. Testing CFCs with TestBox works just like you expect it to. Make an instance of your CFC. In this case, I have one in a models directory called facility.cfc. Get that back, and then use those same expect arguments to, or that expect library stuff to figure out what kind of component it is. Did it get the value that I expected, or did it return the value I expected, and so on. If you're doing a cold box application, cold box has different events. That's how different, pages get rendered and how you broadcast messages from one part of your app to another. Events all look like this. They have a name and then a dot and then another optional portion after it. You can test those cold box event mechanisms with TestBox as well. Simply, you do the same thing. You have your extend. In this case, you extend your cold box stuff, and then go get that event to run in cold box, and then use your expect value, the expect library stuff, just a syntax to check the values just like you would in anything else. That's all well and good, Nolan, but our apps are way more complex than one, CFM file with a couple of math functions in it. How does this stuff work in the real world? Can you use TestBox to test really big code bases? Yes, you can. I'll show you an actual one. So this is real code from a real app my team and I worked on. I'm not going to run the entire app for you because of different privacy reasons, but this is an app called emission control. And in the web, under the web www folder, I have a test folder. You can see there's TestBox right there. I'll make this a little bit bigger so you can see it there. All right. So we have our TestBox folder and then our test folder. And then just like before, here's my runner CFM with those same config settings in here. You'll notice inside my test folder, there are a few other items, one of which is this specs folder, which is just basically a subfolder to put all of our tests inside it. And here I have tests for my API endpoints. I have a client API. I can say, these test different things in the API. Go get a list of clients. Here are the endpoints. Here's how you get the endpoint to your API. So, servername.com/API/ the rest of the URL. Go get that URL, run a thing, get the response back, deserialize the JSON out of it to get back the useful information, and then you use your expect notation to check the value, make sure it does what I want it to do. We have a variety of tests in here. This is just for the client endpoint in my API. So our API has however many CFCs that is, about 10 or 12. And each one of these have different tests in them for testing the different spots in our API. And I've got integration tests for talking to the dashboard, some date utility library stuff we did. So you can do, test all kinds of different stuff in here. TestBox also has these nice features before all and after all, where you can have some code run before your tests run. Like if you need to, copy data files over from a different network share or whatever, or after your tests are done, if you want to delete those log files, and make sure that you leave the server in the same state that it was in when you started your test, that sort of thing. I've got a services library in here. Here's authentication stuff. Make sure that we can, authenticate in the application. Can I log in? Can users change their passwords correctly? Do the remember me cookies work the way they're supposed to work? All that kind of stuff. We have tests. There are hundreds and hundreds of tests in here for this application. So yes, TestBox works for real world apps with lots and lots of code. You can see we have lots and lots of code here in this app. I've got some custom tags that do different things. I've got my cold box event handlers. There are some layout files. We've got a variety of JavaScript items in here, Alpine and some other custom JS that we wrote. And TestBox is checking all that stuff just fine. Front-end testing. So TestBox is great for your back-end stuff. What do we do about the code on the front end? So front-end libraries, of which there are several, Cypress, Playwright, Concept, a bunch of others. None of those care what server language you're using, CFML, PHP, Go, Python, whatever. By the time your front end tests run, all of that backend stuff has finished executing. So Cypress, for example, doesn't know if you have Python on the back end or CFML or anything else. All it knows is I got a UI, I got some front end stuff I'm going to run through and click and do different things with, and they're going to work just fine. So really just pick whichever front end library you like and go from there. My team has historically used Cypress on several things. We've also used Concept. I've been looking at Playwright more recently and a couple other similar things. Cypress is great. They're all JavaScript based. Cypress is no different. It's got a lot of great command line tools. There's a great YouTube channel for Cypress. If you want to check that out, they are constantly adding new features to it. Everything's pretty well documented. A Cypress.js test looks like this. You have a describe block describing here's some functionality I want to test, and then you have an it block, say it, and you're describing what this specific test does, and then all of your Cypress functionality begins with cy dot visit this URL, go look for a field with an ID of email on that page, type this email address into that field, go find the password field, type in my password, make sure that it has that value, go find the sign in button, click that button. You can run Cypress.js in the GUI. Again, just you type npx cypress open. You can run things from the command line with Cypress. It works really well. You can run them in all kinds of different situations. It's really nice. Good things about Cypress.js, it's very easy to use. Like I said, there's a big community. The YouTube channel is fantastic. The downside to something like Cypress is if your team is not great at writing clean HTML, that will affect the selectors working properly. If your team is using, for example, table-based HTML to lay things out that are not tables and tabular data, you're using it to maybe have a really old UI that was built in the 90s and you use it to lay out table tags to lay things out and have just never updated it. Because the table tag is not technically meant for that sort of situation, you may find that the different front-end testing libraries, not just Cypress, but any of them, may have a hard time finding the selectors and finding the different important spots in your HTML markup because your code is bad. So write proper code and you have fewer issues. You'll also be in less of a chance of ending up with an ADA compliance, accessibility problem from lawyers and such if you write quality front-end code, but that's a whole other topic. You can automate your tests too. I forgot to run the tests before I deployed the latest amount of code is a common thing people will say. Developers are lazy. So anytime we can remove a manual step from the process and automate things, that's always a good way to go. If you use GitHub have a thing called GitHub Actions. So every time you check code into a particular branch, every time you approve a pull request, every time you do a handful of different things with GitHub can automatically run different functionality for you. One of the things it can do is it can run TestBox tests or Cypress tests for you. The way you do that is in GitHub Actions, you make a YAML file and get some of that code to fire off. I will show you how some of that works here. Go back in and close some of these files down. And then you can see in this project, I have a .github folder. And I have a Cypress YAML file. In this case, it says every time we push code to main or approve a pull request in main, it's going to run this set of steps down here. Basically, it's going to build out a Docker container running Ubuntu, check out my code, and then it's going to run the Cypress tests in a kind of a virtual machine thing up in GitHub land that's using Chrome as a browser to test all of my code and make sure that it works how it's supposed to. I can do the same thing with TestBox. I have a TestBox YAML file in that GitHub Workflows folder. Anytime we push code to main or approve a pull request, run these things here. Go make a container running Ubuntu, check out the code, and install everything I need to install, start up the engine. In this case, we're running Lucy 5.3, and then do TestBox run, and it's going to run the tests. I don't have to do anything on my local environment. My developers don't have to do anything on the local environment. This all happens automatically in github.com anytime we push code up to, in this case, the main branch or approve a pull request. So now we've gotten rid of the excuse developers often have of, oh, I forgot to run the test. That's why something happened there. Make a pipeline and you're done. Cypress YAML file, we already looked at that. And there's my TestBox YAML file. So automating the test is not really as crazy as maybe that looked. If you're not familiar with YAML files or doing the DevOps things with github.com and that sort of thing, there's a lot of documentation online now to make those processes really easy, in addition to just you can have AI write a big chunk of that YAML stuff for you automatically too. So really, there are no more excuses as to why people should, may not have tests in their application, but we're going to go through a couple of the common ones developers like to throw out there anyway. It's really hard to configure. I don't know how to set up all of these testing libraries. Again, put command box on your machine. There's no reason not to have command box present day. And then type box install test box. You wait about 10 seconds, and now you have test box. If you want to test the front end using something like Cypress, you type npm install Cypress. You wait another 10 seconds, and now you have Cypress for your front end tests. They both work immediately. You don't have to do anything once they're installed. And then AI makes this stuff super easy too. If you're not using Claude Code yet, that is $20 well spent each month. It makes a lot of this repetitive DevOps boilerplate setup for your projects super easy. And it even tests the stuff that, that it puts together for you. So it makes it really, really easy to get going with everything. That's a lot of typing is another excuse I hear a lot from developers. I'm a slow typer. I'm only a two-finger typer and that sort of thing. First off, that is an invalid excuse. Second, extra typing is a one-time pain point for one developer. And then once that typing is done, everybody benefits from it. Your developer, the rest of your developers on your team all have a better structured, more tested code base. Your customers have a better, more structured, tested code base. There's no downside to a little bit of extra typing. And really, how much time is that extra typing going to take you anyway? Realistically, what, a few seconds, maybe a couple of minutes per day or something, even if you're a slow typer? Every one of us have real IDEs installed now with extensions and macros and hotkeys and plugins and scripts that do all kinds of stuff. So really, you're not writing the tests 100% from scratch manually anyway. You're going to copy and paste things. You're going to find shortcuts to use to speed up that process and move things around. The nice folks at Ortus have written a VS Code extension for TestBox. They've also got a boxlang. Oh, I'm blanking on what they call it, like a boxlang plugin or whatever for VS Code as well. And again, AI tools make all of this stuff really crazy, easy, and efficient. So don't worry about the typing part of it. That's a non-issue nowadays. If you feel overwhelmed by a lot of this stuff, that's understandable. It's a lot of new information all at once. If you're new to this kind of thing, take a breath and relax. And again, remember, you don't have to start with 100% test coverage on your back end and 100% test coverage on your front end. Start wherever you're comfortable starting. Write one test and see if that passes. One test is way better than no tests at all. Like, there's no bad place to start adding tests to your app. So pick something and go with that. Like maybe start with your login page. Make sure that users can log in and out correctly and build onto it from there if you need to. Nobody has 100% test coverage on day one. If anyone has told you they do, they're lying. That's not how it works. You can always add tickets in like Jira or GitHub issues or whatever, task tracking platform you're using to do things like, write a test for this feature once the feature is done or in parallel while you're working on it and that sort of thing. That's a whole lot of stuff to learn, Nolan. That's why I'm overwhelmed and don't want to do this. Well, again, remember all the backend syntax is CFML. So if you're already using CFML, you know how to write TestBox tests. You learn a couple of new keywords that really you're going to copy and paste most of the time anyway, so you don't have to really remember how a lot of them work. And then on the front end, it's all JavaScript. Not only that, but the type of tests you write on the front end and the type of tests you write on the back end also all look very similar to each other. Here's a Cypress test. It's got a describe block at the top and then two it blocks inside it describing the two tests inside this Cypress.js file. Here's a test box test. I've got a describe block and an it block inside it with, instead of sci.visit, sci.get, sci.expect stuff. And here we have just expect another thing. But all the describe and all the it stuff, it's exactly the same. It's also the same in something like Angular. You have a describe block, you have an it block, you have your expect statements. So even when you go from front end to back end testing or vice versa, you already know how to do a little bit of the other side of it because you learned it. You learned the same thing either way. So just start writing your tests. Don't worry about where, don't worry about how much test coverage you have, just start. Some other stuff that helps along the way. Use source control. If you're not using GitHub or Bitbucket or something like that yet, solve that problem this week. Again, there's no reason not to use source control. If someone on your team says they don't like source control, that's a red flag. If you need help convincing a manager to use source control, send them to south of Shasta. I'll happily have the conversation with them. If you're on source control, use a branching strategy. There's no cost to making branches in something like GitHub. You can make 1,000 branches. GitHub will run just the same as if you have one branch. So make a branch, try out some testing things. If you don't like it, throw the branch out, try something else, move forward from there. Try not to write code in the main branch as your general day-to-day thing. That is a red flag. Full disclosure, depending on the project, I may do that some myself, but that's usually for things that are like prototypey and not live yet, and I'll develop a branching strategy maybe a little bit later in the process sometimes. But yeah, try not to write code in main if you can avoid it. Ideally, you want to write your test at the same time that you're writing the code, not sometime in the future. Often when people approach it that way, they'll finish the feature, and then maybe your sales and marketing people get antsy and they want to just launch the feature right now before the test is out. You may have a hard time convincing the non-technical people why the test is important, especially if the feature that's going to make them revenue is done. So if you can, try to write the test when you write the feature. There's a practice called test-driven development that sort of formalizes that and makes that process easier. In that case, what they do actually too is you can write the test first and then write the code that makes the test pass after the fact. I've had mixed results with that, depending on the project or type of code I'm writing. Sometimes that has been very, very helpful. Other times, not as much, but maybe that's just my shortcoming. Another thing that sometimes helps is you can have a thing like no deploy Fridays. No code gets pushed to production on Fridays, so maybe Friday is your day to catch up on writing the tests for the features you completed on Monday through Thursday. And then when the following Monday comes around, you can deploy everything and have the test suites that's there to make sure it all works. If you are using a framework of some kind in your app, whether it's Coldbox or Framework One, or on the front end like Vite or Vue or whatever, all of that makes your code more testable. There's no downside to using a framework from that perspective. So that's another thing that you may benefit from. Maybe check out how to move your code over to an MVC framework if you have not done so just yet. And if it still seems like a whole lot of stuff to learn, there's an idea that I read about years ago. I wish I could find the original article on this. There was a developer that had a side project. He was trying to build this app outside of his day job and finish some app and get it, up into the app store. And he'd come home from work and he'd be like, "Oh, I'm tired. I won't work on it today." And he'd come home the next day and think, "Okay, I'll work on a little bit tonight." But then, you know, his wife would need him to do something, whatever. And then he'd say, "Okay, I'm going to work on my app all weekend long." And then the weekend would get there and there'd be a family obligation, or he forgot his kid had a soccer tournament, or whatever the thing was going on. So then one day the developer decided, "I'm going to go work on my app every single day. Even if it's only for a half an hour, I'm going to work on my app every single day in a row." And what he found was, even in something as small as 30 minutes a day, the work he was able to get done compounded so quickly that momentum built up. He was able to finish features much faster. When he sat down to work on his app, he never had to think back to 6 or 8 weeks ago, the last time he worked on the app. It was always just yesterday when he worked on it. So while he was doing his day job, in the back of his mind, his brain was always kind of churning away a little bit about that new thing he was working on, that new feature in his application. You can apply that same sort of philosophy to learning TestBox, learning how test-driven development works, learning how to organize your code structure a little bit better, anything of that nature that will help move you forward. So your app is more testable and you're able to get more value out of this sort of thing when you work on stuff. I've used the 30 minutes a day idea for finishing apps, finishing features, writing songs for my band. A friend of mine wrote and published her first book in 30 minutes a day. It's a fantastic way to just sort of creep something into your workflow without it being a great big time suck or feeling completely overwhelming about how to do these kind of things. For things like Cypress, there's a really good YouTube channel for the test box and related functionality into stuff. Ortus have a website called cfcasts.com. You can subscribe to that and watch a whole bunch of different videos from their previous conferences. And then there's just different tutorial series up there they've made for a whole variety of, layers of software development. There's other little smaller videos for like just little training tidbits and developer tips and tricks. All kinds of great stuff on cfcast.com. It's well worth a subscription. They also offer an Ortus TestBox workshop where you can get like, I think it's 1 or maybe 2 days worth of hands-on training using TestBox. They do that sometimes at different conferences like CS Summit or Into the Box. So check out the Ortus stuff they have there. I wrote a presentation several years ago that's also on my GitHub called Testing My Non-Cold Box Site with TestBox. And it's specifically that scenario. I have TestBox and I'm stuck using a bunch of CF includes or something that's not a Coalbox MVC app. How do I combine those two and make my code testable? So there's some slides and other resources in that GitHub repo that might be worth checking out for you. And this is where you can find me if you have other questions about things. And with that, we're at the end of the presentation. I think I saw a couple of comments in the chat that I admittedly was not looking at directly. Let me find it now and see if there are some questions in here that I can answer real quick for people while I'm.
I think it was mostly just comments
Okay,
instead
cool.
of questions, but
Oh, good. All right.
I guess I do have a question for you. As far as TestBox goes, is there any way to use TestBox outside of installing CommandBox?
Yes, you can just go to the repo and manually download it. You can download it as part of Coalbox. It comes with that. There's also a TestBox repo on GitHub, I believe, and you can grab it from there and put it in too.
Okay.
Out of curiosity, if you don't mind me asking though, why not just install CommandBox?
Because my entire development workflow is based off of Docker containers,
That's
and
okay.
doing the CommandBox Docker container is I'm honestly a mess. So
Okay, that's um, the two do work really well together. I do it all the time. So maybe it's changed since the last time we looked at it or whatever. But uh, yeah. Anyway, to answer your question, yes, you can install just TestBox by going to GitHub and grabbing it from there, or from. I'm sure there's a link somewhere on like ortussolutions.com to grab it too.
okay, and I guess the other question I have too is there any way to use TestBox so that it can output like HTML or sorry, HTTP errors as opposed to spitting stuff out on the screen?
Um,
To in my case,
yes.
again, that would be to help with automation because I don't want to, you know, during like commit processes and that type of stuff, run these in the background.
So yes, you can have it output different things. So here in that runner.cfm file that we mentioned earlier, this is the config file for TestBox. And I didn't go in here and change any of the config settings because you don't have to get TestBox running. It defaults to, it will run and spit things out in the browser for you like we had here. It's outputting the results of my test. However, you can go into this file and let me find it. Bundles exclude. Come on, where is it? There is a way to have it spit out like to a log file. It'll spit out CSV and PDF and do all kinds of stuff. I'm just not seeing the setting right now. Maybe it's not in this particular version of the file. But yes, you can have TestBox output to other things than just plain HTML.
Okay, but th those are still like just reports that come out. Can it do like I said, like error codes or things like that?
What do you mean by do error codes?
So like a lot of the tests that I run, so I use Selenium for a lot of my stuff, but essentially I'll go ahead and HTTP endpoint or something like that, and if I get a 200, I know that the test passed. like a 500 or anything else, I know
Oh,
that it fails and I need to flag it or something like that.
yes. So here, let me go back to the test for my real world app. And then, so here are the tests in the API that we wrote. I'll pick here, client. Here. So I'm calling this is in my test box test. I call CF HTTP, and then you get the results back in result. The error code comes back in the result variable, I believe, right? You get something like RSLT dot response code or something like that, and then that'll be equal to 200 or whatever the code is if it failed.
Yeah. Yep.
So what you could do and then is in here do something like I'm going to comment that, but leave it there for reference. You do something like expect RSLT dot response code to be 200. You do something like you can do that. I might be a tiny bit wrong on the syntax, but you can do that general idea. Like, yes, test the HTTP result, make sure what I got back
No,
is the response code I wanted.
and what I'm really looking for is the tests themselves to error out or things like that, as opposed to the code that I'm testing.
So usually you don't want the test to error out. You want this test to show that it failed and then the rest of the test to continue running. Oh, here, I've got the status code. All right, it's right below me and I just didn't see it. Or code status code there. So let me delete this fake one. So that would show you this would show you that the test will run. It'll turn red, I think, because it failed, but it'll show you why it failed. It failed because it got a status code that was not 200.
Right.
Is that what you're wanting, or am I still not
No,
understanding your question?
yeah, like I said, in my case, it's more about the automation. So I want to be able to hit the test box suite or whatever testing suite that I have, and then it give my automation suite an error as opposed to just writing it to the browser or a report or something like that. So if everything passes in that case, then I know that it can go and push to production or push to my staging or something like that. So everything I've seen from TestBox, it always assumes that you're writing a report or you're writing to the browser or something like that to identify that the tests are successful or not.
And you want it to do,
Give me an error or something like that that I can then trigger on for my automation, as opposed to a human seeing that, the thing is green or the thing is red.
you can do like, so here in the DevOps end of things, yeah, we could, um, there's probably a way to do it, yeah. Reporter text, and then, so here in the DevOps workflow, we've got in this example, run the test suite, and then it's outputting the results in plain text as opposed to HTML.
Yeah. And
You
then
could do
then I'd have to
something,
grep that to see if there's an error or something like that then, right?
yeah. There's probably a DevOps thing to do to make it more automated than that. I guess if these are steps in your DevOps workflow and one of the steps fails, it's not going to continue doing the deploy like here DevOps.
Right.
So, so run, output the build. Yeah, so do things like this. Do let's see. So here, this is the build step for this app. So do a
Yep.
build, and then like something like this. This is pseudocode, but just bear with me here.
Sure,
So
sure.
um, run the test box tests. And then in here, you would do something like, test box run, whatever that thing was over here. This. I think. So they're going to run that test. So these are all steps that go in sequence top down in my build pipeline.
Right.
So if the test step fails, it's not going to continue on from there and build the image and do more stuff.
Right.
So
But
if you write
yeah,
your
where I like to have my stuff is, let's say that there is, the CI does come up with an error, like so the tests come up with some sort of blocking error or something like that, that I stop running the integration tests, and then, kind of like that. So
you stop it, like you manually stop it.
no, it won't like continue on the build script. So I don't make like a release or whatever at that point.
Well, that's
If
what you could do that here. You can set up a build thing like a workflow like this where,
Yep.
and then have this return a variable or something with the um, test status. You know,
Yeah, and that's what I was asking, is like that test status piece, like if it's successful or not. So
yeah,
that's
you can
okay.
do things like that. Let me see if I have a different example that makes this a little bit more clear. Shoot, not in code that I can show you easily right now, but
Okay. Yeah.
you can have steps in like a build process, like save data to a variable or something, and then read that variable later on. And if the variable says all tests passed, do your build and deploy your code. And if the variable says no, we had whatever integration test fail, then don't do the build and instead email your DevOps guy or something.
That's what I was kind of looking for, and I couldn't. Last time I was messing with TestBox, I couldn't figure out how to do that piece out of everything. So
I think that's more of a DevOps workflow thing than a test box thing, but yes, it's possible.
okay.
Does that help answer your question?
Yeah,
All right.
I'll continue looking at that, but in that
Okay.
case.
I'm just bring to the chat here real quick. Yeah, look, it's still just comments. Any
Yeah,
other
John
questions from people?
Farrar posted what he does in that particular situation, Nick.
Yeah,
Oh,
and
there you go.
again, the stuff I'm seeing from John Farrar's is he's doing that report, but it's generating an HTML file that then you have to have a human read, as opposed to determining if that test was actually successful for automation. So
Right. I thought you asked if it could put out HTML.
no. I'm reading in. So I'm going through my entire test suite, and then, can I generate an error code or something like that I can read in, like, off the command line, essentially.
You can, uh, if you're not running from the line, that makes sense. If you're not running from command box. I just haven't set it up without it. I'm trying to remember what the old testing framework was.
The old MX unit.
Yes, MX unit. That one I messed with setting up custom things before, but I have taken the gravy ride with Ortus because I like command box. So, but I respect if their scenario is different, development is always personal to the company and the developer.
Am I
Worst case, I
understanding
bet
the issue
if you had
correctly?
sorry, go ahead, Randy.
Sorry. Am I understanding your issue correctly, Nick? You want to basically use this test box to build and deploy Docker images in AWS. And if it
So
fails, like with the, I don't know, 400, whatever code, you want to stop the build process.
yeah, so the way a lot of my code, my more complex projects work, is I'll go and commit something in GitHub,
Yep.
for example, or whatever, the repository I'm using. And when I go and use GitHub to cut a build, it runs the GitHub runner in the background. And I do a bunch of my integration tests in that case. And if any of my tests fail, I don't want it to actually successfully build um, or build a release. And that building
Okay.
the release, that goes and cuts my Docker image and all that type of stuff, and then pushes it out to Docker Hub and all the other things.
Hmm. And this won't work because it dumps to the browser all the time and you're running this basically on the command line.
Well, Nolan's saying that it should be able to do that. So
Hmm. Got me
You
scratching.
can you can make different like in basically environment variables in your pipelines
yep.
and set the status of the tests in one and then read them in another one later. And if the value says a test failed, then yeah, don't do the build Docker image portion of your script.
Right.
I'm willing to bet that if you posted about that in the Ortus Slack channel, Brad or one of those guys would probably already have something ready to go they can just send you that does that. Any other questions from anyone?
Yeah, I was going to ask you. I've seen other people do this in other software, but let's say you're running tests and you involve in adding a few records to the database, one or multiple, and they will automatically, when the test is done, delete those from the database. So you always have a pristine. Does TestBox do that?
It does, yeah. So let me pull up an example of that real quick and I can show you where's some code for this. Oh, probably over here. Yeah, so there are functions in TestBox that run code before and after your test run. Let me grab a good example here real quick before I share my screen. I know I have done this before. Basically not. Let's go. Let's see. Let's see if this has a good example of it in here. After all. Don't have a good example of that. Well, here I can show you this part at least. This will give you a general idea of what it does. Let me share my screen again. So in your TestBox CFCs, this one happens to be a cold box one, but that's irrelevant. They all work the same way. You've got your describe and your if blocks down here and stuff. Outside of that run function, up above it, you can add two more functions. They're optional. One's called before all and one's called after all. The idea is before all your tests run, you can have some code that goes in here. Like, for example, if your tests need these certain 5 records added to your user table before the whole function, in here you can say insert user 1, user 2, user 3, 4, and 5, put your inserts in there. And it'll run all your tests. After your tests are done, after all will fire. So you can put a thing in there that removes all those records from your database. So you can have your setup and your teardown for your tests by using these before and after function. And there's after before all, and there's before each, and there's after all and after each, and they function, before each of your tests do this thing, or just before the whole suite runs, do this thing once before, and then do something once afterward. And that works pretty well.
So before you could grab like the highest database record and then use that to delete everything that comes that's greater than that?
Technically, yes.
Unless somebody else is using it. If I'm a solo developer, so.
Okay. So yes, you can do those kind of things. Here's the problem with these kind of functions for that sort of purpose is sometimes it gives the message that it's okay to run these tests on, let's say, a production server or a QA server that other humans might be using. You want to try to avoid that whenever possible.
Yeah.
You should not run your tests on production generally ever if you can avoid it. If the tests fail, say you've got a test suite with thousands of tests in it, some of them insert new records or change state in your database. What happens if partway through that test suite, that process, something blows up and your tests fail? before your tests get to that teardown code that undoes all the database changes you made. So now your database is stuck in this unknown state where it's got some fake records in it, some real data. The fake records, we lost track of which ones we added and which ones we deleted because there was a network hiccup. There was a chunk of code that had a bug in it. There was, somebody tripped over the cable connecting your database to your web server, whatever the thing is that causes that kind of problem to happen. So ideally, you want to run all your tests on like a testing copy of your app and a testing copy of the database. So like spin up a Docker container for your database, spin up a Docker container or a command box container or whatever. They make command box for Docker, so you can just smush the two together, run all your tests in this isolated environment, and then tear everything down when you're done.
Couldn't you have an on-air function so that when the error commits, it still takes the database record, you just add it out?
You could. I still would not do that on like a production database that
I'm
other
not
people are
talking about
touching.
production database.
Um,
Okay,
but yeah,
it would mess up if it didn't delete them. It might mess up your test database. So,
yeah, it could mess up your test database.
the other thing I was going to ask you, which we alluded to before, was if you could talk about AI and what experiments you've done with testing in AI.
The little bit I've done with testing with AI are things like basically you can if I write a test the way I want it written, and I want all of my tests to follow that same pattern of call these setup functions, then do this testing, then run these teardown functions afterward, that sort of thing. I've had really good results with Claude Code saying, here's the first test that I'm using as a template. Write tests that follow this pattern for these sections of my app, and it'll tear through and just create those tests for me and knock them out. And I've also had really good luck when that's done, telling Claude Code usually, or I've done ChatGPT a little bit too and some others. Mostly I'm a Claude Code guy for day-to-day dev stuff. I tell it like, cool, now run the tests and test my app. And it'll just fire off HTTP requests and pull the pages up and do things with it. And that works really well.
Haven't tried that. That sounds like a really good idea. In fact, I will probably experiment with that.
Yeah, if you haven't installed Claude Code yet, that's been a huge bump in productivity for people. There are a couple of different
I've downloaded it, but I
paid
haven't set it
tiers.
up.
Oh, install that thing. That'll be your new fun thing to learn in 30 minutes a day this week.
Okay.
There's a couple of different paid pricing levels. I think I do the $20 a month one, and it works great. It solves so many problems for me. I had Claude Code write 80-90% of the Stripe integration code for me earlier this week for a project. I didn't touch a line of code. I made the Stripe account, said, here's my Stripe account, here are the credentials. Please add a shopping cart to this part of the app that does these things. And I sat here and watched a skateboard contest for about a half an hour, and then Claude went, okay, I'm done. And it worked. I didn't change a thing.
Did it write it in CF?
That app was not CF. That app was, I lied. No, that is a CF app. Yeah,
Okay.
that was Lucy code.
Good.
Yeah, it wrote services, it wrote a test, it wrote I didn't tell it anything. It went, oh, this is a Boxling project. Okay, I'll make a model CFC. I'll make a services CFC. I need these type of environment variables to talk to your Stripe API key. And it just made it like I didn't touch a line of code and it worked first try.
Okay. Have you installed and played around at all with OpenClaw? That's something I went to. They had a claw count down in Ann Arbor, and I've been excited about getting that set up since, but I haven't got it done yet.
Not really of anything of worth noting, no.
Okay.
Another thing that's kind of in this vein that's worth checking out is the company DigitalOcean.
Yep.
They had a 1-day conference in San Francisco maybe 3 weeks ago that my business partner and I went to, showing off a bunch of the new DigitalOcean stuff they're offering right now. And they have several really, really nice developer-centric AI features that are available now on their platform. And I believe the keynote from that is on YouTube now. The event was called DigitalOcean Deploy. So just look for the DigitalOcean Deploy keynote from 2026. And yeah, there's so much stuff like that coming out now.
It's hard for me to keep up. I'm watching a couple hours a day of YouTube, and I'm still not able to grab it all.
there's a lot happening right now with things. Yeah, it's easy to feel overwhelmed with it all.
Yeah. Okay. I
Nolan,
appreciate that.
Yes, sir.
I'm biased that you already do this, but I'm assuming you also lean hard into skills.
You're biased that that I already do what?
AI skills.
Oh, I wouldn't say I lean hard into them, but I probably need to lean harder into them than I do currently.
Yeah, I was going to ask you if you had a skill file for Lucy, because that'd be kind of useful for getting started.
I do not have a skill file for Lucy. That's another thing that I bet if you post it in either the Ortus or the Lucy Slack channels, I'm sure somebody would have one. Or CF Camp is happening in like a month. Maybe there'll be a whole bunch of new stuff coming out of that too.
Yeah,
Ortus
some of the
has created their own library of skills that they'll be opening up to the public.
Yeah,
So I'm imagining now that we have the three-way competition, it'll be coming for the other two.
that wouldn't surprise me. I have no insider info, but the other wouldn't surprise me.
okay. Randy, do you have any questions?
I put my question in the chat. He keeps mentioning Claude Code, and I said, "What about Codex?"
Oh, I see that now. Sorry, I didn't notice it before.
No
I
problem.
have not done enough with Codex to have um, an educated opinion on it. Sorry, I don't have a good answer for you on that one.
No problem. It would be interesting to see. You said 30 minutes and Claude wrote all the code for you for the Stripe integration. That's
Yeah,
interesting. I don't know if
it
I
did.
trust it.
Yeah.
I'm like John. I would still have to go through it. I'm sure you already reviewed it before you released it, you know?
Oh yeah, it's absolutely getting reviewed and tested, and yeah, I didn't just blindly hit save and then push to production. But the fact that it did a lot of the boilerplate uh, integration for me and did it well too. I didn't tell it anything. So I used Claude Code. I just started in the root directory of that app. Like, here's what I want done, and I give it all the info. Claude Code figured out, oh, this is a Boxling project. Oh, it's using Box. Oh, I should make a services CFC. Oh, I should make environment variables for the API keys, and it just did it. I didn't have to tell it. I didn't have to do very much handholding at all. It just kind of knew best practices and knew how to, put the right folders in the right spot. It knew how to make proper object-oriented files. Yeah, and then I review the code in the branch that I made for it, check it all out, and then, you know, test it manually, and then I had Claude test it, and I have my business partner test it, and then we write, TestBox and whatever else test for it. And but yeah, the fact that it did all of the boilerplate stuff for me um, was really nice. Like if nothing else, like it cuts down on the stuff that A is not super interesting to write, and
Mhm.
B is possibly very prone to bugs that are just me having typos. If I
Mhm.
format the URL for the API integration, and if I forget the colon before the two slashes, or if it's not slash API v1, it's slash API slash v1, or any of the tedious stuff that we often, you know, don't do right because it's the end of the day and we're tired or whatever. I turn a bunch of that kind of stuff. I turn Claude loose on a bunch of that kind of stuff, and it's like you do it, and it goes all right, spits it out, and
I was trying to trick him there, Rick, to see if he tested the code that was generated by Claude Code.
oh
But
yeah,
then question, he said, yes, he did test it. And I'd be like, so why did you have Claude Code write tests for TestBox since it wrote it? You see what I mean?
it
What
was that
test?
code
No.
is so to be fair, that the Stripe integration on that one, full disclosure, is not live yet. This is a project in development right now.
Okay.
Um, so there's been no deploy to prod manually or with Claude or otherwise yet. It's still just Docker containers that my business partner and I are looking at and making sure things do what they need to do.
I don't know if you have done any plan mode with Claude,
Um,
where you're laying a project
uh,
out, and
a little bit, yeah, but probably not enough to really
I
delve into
know a
any too
guy
much
who's
detail.
way ahead of me as far as AI coding, and he always says to do plan mode, and then he goes to Codex and he has Codex criticize the plan that Claude wrote. And he says, you can't imagine how much a difference that makes. You have a lot of confidence when that's done, and then you incorporate those changes, have Claude incorporate those changes. Claude thinks it's you figuring it out, I guess. I don't know. And you just get better results.
They get into
Doesn't cost
some
hardly anything for Codex. You know,
they get into some similar things in that DigitalOcean deploy keynote that I mentioned earlier. They have an app that'll, like, you give it a development task, and there's a new might be an agent. There's a new thing that DigitalOcean offers where you tell it, here's the type of development work I want to get done. And DigitalOcean has a mechanism now that says, oh, this type of work is best done by this model. And it knows which one to farm the work out to get the best results back. And then you can tell it, split the work up this way and have A test B when you're done and whatever. And
Ortus mentioned in their keynote they have some sort of deploy. I'm not sure if it's specific to AWS or DigitalOcean, but they didn't spend a lot of time on it. But they mentioned that they had written something.
I don't remember that part.
Okay. I tried a couple of years to talk them into doing something like that or go into CF hosting. They weren't interested, but they had the resources, and I didn't know anybody else who had the resources to pull it off. So
yeah, it's a lot of people are moving towards, like, it's not really CF specific hosting right now. I mean, some efforts need it. Like, there's that XByte, those guys do it, and I think is it Host Media and one or two others that are still around, but a lot of people are moving towards the virtualized Docker container kind of system where
I'm trying to think of that guy from Argentina that's a billionaire now, and he just does JavaScript, and it's super simple and powerful, and I can't think of the name of his hosting company, but
I don't know.
He just in the last couple of years he's become a billionaire from it. He's very popular in the Vue and React communities.
I don't know. I don't know who that might be.
I know you know the name. I can't think of the name right now. If anybody else knows it, give it to me. I just watched an interview that they did on the Claude conference with him.
Yeah, I don't know. It's not Lex, is it?
No.
Lex. Okay.
I said I just watched the guy. It's the first time I'd ever seen the guy interviewed, and it was a good interview. It's worth checking. It's only like 30 minutes or something, but
from the Claude conference earlier this year. I'll check that out.
And I'm a big Nuxt user, and Nuxt had raised some venture capital, and it wasn't working out for them as far as it's popular, but they weren't generating enough revenue or whatever, and they swooped in his company and bought it. So now those guys work for the guy that created Next. That's a big React developer, and they're pushing hosting. They had set up with Nuxt to host on Cloudflare, and I think that's all going to get switched to AWS, which is, I think, what this guy's company uses. But it was impressive.
Yeah, I don't know. I have one metal server left with some sites on it, and I'm moving that over to Docker containers later this year. And then I won't have any more servers to actually host. I can just spin up a container kind of wherever I want and let it get there. Too many late nights of my phone beeping with a client saying the server's down. What's happened? I can't do this. Like, I don't want to do that anymore. I've spent too much time that way.
Has anybody got any questions left for Nolan? John? Maybe we're good. I want to thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.
Is there anything left in the chat?
Review at CF Summit. I don't think so. Look at just John making comments in there. Hi, John, by the way. Good to see you. It's been a while. Cool. Well, maybe I'll see all of you guys at an upcoming conference or something. Have a good night, everybody.
All right. Thanks again.
Thanks very much.
Appreciate it.
Anytime.